is being re-released, and I've been talking to Jane Fonda, who stars in the film with Lily Tomlin and Dolly Parton, of course. We'll hear from Jane after this clip featuring her as Judy Burnley with Lily Tomlin as Violet Newstead.
Okay, now we're on the 12th floor, above the executive suite, where the president, Mr. Hinkle, is, and the chairman of the board. Come on, 12.
It sounds so big.
It is. I've been here 12 years. I've never even seen the chairman of the board.
12 years? Well, I've done is be a housewife. Oh, I wanted to ask you about my salary. I don't think I can
That's a very touchy subject around here. You'll have to take that up with our boss, Mr. Hart.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's all so new.
Don't worry. You're going to get the hang of it. Then you'll really be sorry. I'm just testing. Come on. Well, welcome to the front line.
That was a clip from 95.
Well, welcome to the front line.
Jane Fonda.
Thank you.
Would you just set up the film for us?
It focuses on three women in particular, played by myself, Lily Tomlin, and Dolly Parton, who work in an office and are treated not so well. There's sexual harassment, there is men being promoted past us. For example, Lily trains men and then turns out that they are promoted and she's not, and things like that. The issues that women in offices were dealing with at that time. We filmed it in the end of the 1970s. And it's a comedy, and we end up devising a plan to take over the office, and it's very funny and very successful. And it made a big difference for women office workers in the United States at the time.
It's interesting that you know, given that it was when it was made, and you just said that you were kind of highlighting issues that were around at the time, you know, a lot of those issues are still around in offices, aren't they?
Well, yes, they are. Men are still promoted past women. There is still sexual harassment, but there are things that are even worse now. For example, many of the workers are hired by another company and then subcontracted to the main company. So if there's a problem, like a woman gets fired because she's pregnant, or there is wage theft or sexual harassment or whatever, you don't have any place to go to raise the issue and get it corrected, because the boss isn't really your boss. You're employed by another company. And then because now there's the internet, social media, digital, they give you a computer and a phone. They can access everybody you call, everything you do. There's no privacy whatsoever. And we're hoping to do a sequel, and the writers are now focusing on the realities of today's office work, and it's pretty bad.
I'd like to come back to the sequel a bit later. I worked in offices for 10 years before I started acting and writing, and that would have been through the 90s mainly. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that are in 9 to 5, I kind of recognise from the environment that I was in. Mm-hmm. And what struck me as one of the many things that are interesting in this fun film was that the three main protagonists define different women at different stages of their life. There's a divorcee, there's a woman who's training the people who are promoted above her, the men that are promoted above her, and a happily married woman who's just judged by her image and stuff. Was that a very conscious decision at that time to represent women in that way? Or your main protagonists, at least?
Yes, well, because I knew that I wanted to get Lily Tomlin and Dolly Parton in the movie, and it was very important to me that they come on board. It took a year to convince them, by the way. I don't know why, but it was very difficult. So, you know, I wanted them to have the better parts. Dolly had never done a movie, and Dolly is Dolly, so obviously you're going to put Dolly in the role of the woman who the boss is constantly chasing around. So there's the sexual harassment part of it. Lily Tomlin seemed to be the right one to make a woman who's been there the longest, who has real seniority, real knowledge of how everything works, but she doesn't get promoted. And then I'm the newbie. I have been married to a wealthy man. My character, Judy Burnley, has never worked in her life. and has no idea what she's doing, and she shows up, and the Lily Tomlin character, Violet, takes her under her arm and kind of teaches her the rope, but I'm very, very naive and don't really know what I'm doing. So I don't know how to work the Xerox machine, and I don't type very well, those kinds of things.
What was the original spark for the idea? It came from you. Was there a moment? Was there something that you saw?
I became friends with a woman named Karen Nussbaum during the Vietnam War. We participated together in the anti-war movement, and her day job at the time, she lived in Boston, was organizing women office workers. And every time we would see each other, she would tell me stories about what they had to put up with. And eventually I said, well, I want to make a movie about this. So we started developing a script, and it was a much darker comedy. But then one day, I didn't know Lily Tomlin, and one day I went and I saw her one-woman show, and I just fell in love with her, and I was so blown away by her talent. And I said to myself, I don't want to make a movie about secretaries unless she is in the movie, because she's just too brilliant. And on my way home that night from the theater, this is a true story, I turned on the radio and Dolly Parton was singing, and I could feel the hair standing up on the back of my neck. I thought, oh my Lord, now wouldn't she be an interesting secretary? And wouldn't people want to come to see a movie where she was in for the first time? And so we had to kind of change the script and make it a broader comedy, and got a new writer and a director, the brilliant Colin Higgins, and the rest is history.
It suddenly strikes me that casting Dolly Parton would have been a huge risk then. I mean, did you know she could act?
It didn't matter. She has such a powerful personality. She is such an engaging character. I mean, just her laugh makes you happy. And I mean, the fact is that she can be herself, but I knew that she would be perfect, whether she was the kind of actor you mean when you say, is she an actor? Doesn't really matter. She's a personality. And there's a lot of personalities who do very well in movies.
You mentioned Colin Higgins, who passed away incredibly young and way too soon.
Yes.
How did you come to him, and what did he bring to the project?
Oh, goodness, he brought everything. In my year-long effort to convince Dolly and Lily to do the movie, I was having to spend a lot of time with their manager, Sandy Gallen. They both had the same manager. He has also passed subsequently. And it was he who suggested Colin Higgins. And, you know, Colin was a writer and director, so he wrote and directed it, and we just loved him. So to help him understand what it was that I wanted to convey, there was an organization. It was called 9 to 5, the National Association of Women Office Workers, and I was an activist within that organization. I knew the leadership, and I said, I want to bring Colin Higgins to Cleveland, where the organization was, Cleveland, Ohio, where the organization was based. Can you get together 30 or 40 secretaries of different ages, different races, different, big, they have to be in big businesses like banks and hospitals and insurance companies, and let them sit in a circle and have him ask them questions and have them tell their stories. And so that did happen, and I brought him to Cleveland, and they went around in a circle, and everybody kind of told their stories. And then, because, Colin was a genius, and then he said, do any of you fantasize what you'd like to do to your boss? And the roof came off. And the things that they told us were just, some of them we couldn't even use. I mean, one said...
What couldn't you use?
We didn't use this one, that she wanted to cut the boss up into tiny pieces and put him through a grinder and then put him in a coffee drip machine and add water and have him drip out his coffee. I mean,
That's a lot of detail.
A lot of detail, yeah. But it was the most brilliant thing to think of, and that's where the fantasies come from.
One of the things that struck me about the film, actually, I mean, it's got just the best beginning. I mean, when the song starts, you kind of know that you're in for a fun time.
Yeah.
And is it right that Dolly Parton came up with the song while you were
We were
filming?
shooting, and one morning she came in. You know, she has nails that are about 4 inches long, and she came in one morning and she asked Lily and I to listen. She said, "I think I've come up with a song," and she used her nails like a washboard. You know, I can't do it because my nails aren't long enough. But she kept time with her by rubbing her nails together, and she started singing. And Lily and I looked at each other, and we knew, oh boy, this not only will be a hit, this will become a movement anthem.
Did you expect at that time that it would have the longevity that it has?
Yeah, because it's funny, and because, as you pointed out in the beginning, the issues are still valid. Yeah.
When you were filming it itself, did it feel like a party? Were you having a good time?
Yeah,
Was it?
it was a
You were
party.
producing as well, because there's that pressure.
Yes, it was. I have a producing partner. I had a producing partner, Bruce Gilbert, and it was like a party. We all got along really well, and there was a lot of laughter. You know, for example, Dolly had never made a movie before. She showed up the first day, not knowing that she didn't have to, but she had memorized the entire script.
Elvis Presley did that on his first film as well, Love Me Tender.
Really?
Yeah, turned up, knew everybody else's lines. This is part of 9 to 5 is showing as part of a BFI season of comedies, but also of your films as well, through to the end of the year. I've got a list of some of the films. The first film of yours I actually went to the cinema to see was The China Syndrome. Jack Lemmon was a huge acting hero of mine, so
Yeah,
I went to
me
see
too.
everything
Yeah.
that he was in. And then, was it a couple of weeks later that 3 Mile Island happened?
2 weeks.
2 weeks
later, 3 Mile Island happened, and people had to see the film to try to understand what it was that had happened. And so, the film did very well, and the film changed a lot of people's minds about nuclear energy.
Well, it made me the smart kid in the playground because I knew exactly what was going on. So I came across as much more intelligent than I actually am. But looking at the list of films that they've got in the season, I mean, it is like a Jane Fonda Greatest Hits Volume 1. I was just wondering, across these, Barefoot in the Park, Barbarella, They Shoot Horses, Clute, Julia, Coming Home, and On Golden Pond, as you mentioned, is there one that stands out for you that you're either particularly proud of?
There's
very
3.
personal? Yeah.
On Golden Pond, for very personal reasons. Well, first of all, it's a wonderful film.
It is, yeah.
That was beloved globally. My father died 5 months after, and so it was very special. I knew that he was ill and that this would be his last movie, for which he won his only Oscar. And it was a magical experience. But also Clute, for which I won my first Oscar. Clute is a perfect film, I think, on every level. It's just the direction, the cinematography, the music. It's a just very, very fine quality movie. And then the third one is Coming Home, which is the first movie that I was involved in conceiving of and producing, because I had spent 3 years working with Vietnam veterans and active duty soldiers. So it meant a lot to me.
And it's a marvellous film.
Yes.
It still holds up.
Yes.
You're utterly unique, of course, because I can't think of anyone else who's won 2 Oscars, had death threats and an FBI file on them.
I'm sure it's happened.
And one of the best selling videos of all time.
Yes.
There's nobody that covers all of those grounds. So, with high expectation, can I ask what's coming next? Grace and Frankie, I think you've done another season.
Yes, the 5th season, which we finished in June, is going to be released by Netflix the middle of January, and we begin our 6th season January 28th.
That's great.
Which I'm very happy about.
And the 9 to 5 sequel, what can you tell us about that?
Well, it's being written. I have had a lot of experience of hoping to do something and having the script written, and it didn't turn out. So, I'm not getting my hopes up too high, but it would be wonderful if it could be done.
Have you spent a year convincing Lily Tomlin and Dolly Parton?
No, this time everybody was on board.
Jane Fonda, it's been an absolute honour. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And that was the legend that is Jane Fonda. Now, she mentioned the 9 to 5 sequel. I'm just putting it out there to you guys. What do you think the sequel should be called? 0 hours contract, 8 till 6. Don't do Wednesdays. Email mayo@bbc.co.uk, text 85058, or contact us on Facebook and on Twitter at Wittertainment. So, Jane Fonda, 9 to 5, re-released in cinemas on November the 16th. Clarice, you've rewatched it. What did you think?
Yeah, so I want to bring up an article that was published about a week ago. And I will preface this by saying that it was written by a man, but it was claiming that it was ridiculous to call 9 to 5 a classic feminist comedy. And that left me feeling very frustrated because it's just such a misunderstanding of how we relate to cinema. And, you know, cinema is history, and you can't strip films of that history and force them to exist in a vacuum where they remain eternally relevant. Because I think if they do the sequel, yes, they will have to drastically update it, but I think 9 to 5 is still absolutely a classic feminist comedy because it spoke so much to where feminism was at that period, which was 1980, and so many women in joining the workforce in record numbers, and they were turning up, and you know, what did they get? They got inequality in pay, sexual harassment, male colleagues getting promoted in front of them despite, you know, any inexperience. And so the film is responding to that, and that's why it meant so much, and that's why I think it can still mean so much, because obviously not a huge amount has changed. And so I understand that the plot is, you know, it's very exaggerated, the idea of dealing with your sexist boss by kidnapping him and holding him to ransom, basically. And
well, it's clearly a satire, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of, that's what it's meant to be.
And they have these, you know, outrageous fantasy sequences. So, you know, Jane Fonda's character and Lily Tomlin's character and Dolly Parton's character will daydream about him being hunted down like an animal or getting a taste of his own medicine. But I think that spoke to real frustrations of women having to watch these men at the top that could act however they liked, and there was nothing that they can do about it. And so the extremity of the film reflects the extremity of the frustrations of feeling a complete lack of agency in their lives. And I think you see that also in almost the wider culture of the 1980s, because it was all about the giant shoulder pads and the giant hair. And I have to say, for me, my go-to power office lady film is actually Working Girl because of how much I love Melanie.
You have a power office lady
film. Power lady office film. Sorry, power lady office film. My go-to power lady office film is Working Girl because of Melanie Griffith and Joan Cusack in that just giant, beautiful monstrosity hair. But I think, you know, as well, to see all those women come together, that's another really important thing about 9 to 5 because, you know, women are constantly pitted against each other, especially in the workplace. And so to see a film in which, you know, even though they initially judge each other, they all judge Dolly Parton's character because they think she's sleeping with the boss. But when they actually sit down and they talk to each other, they find they have all this stuff in common. And so I think, yeah, it's a classic feminist comedy.
I can't understand how anyone could not recognise it as a feminist statement of some kind. I mean, apart from someone who's threatened by that phrase, possibly. But I thought what was really interesting looking back on it, because I think, it has dated in terms of some of the humour and maybe some of the pace, and I'm not sure whether those fantasy sequences quite work within the film. But, the women in the film are incredibly well represented in terms of... So I worked in offices for about 10 years and in very patriarchal kind of companies. And, the three lead characters are... There's a secretary who's kind of treated much like a kind of, a sex object. And then you've got Jane Fonda's character who's divorced. Dolly Parton's character is happily married. And Lily Tomlin's character is a single mother within this. And then you've got a woman in it as well who is kind of siding with their boss, who's kind of like, helping him along, being his stooge, looking for his kind of favour. And I thought that was really a very healthy and broad representation of women without kind of like us being directed to hate any of them or anything like that. And also the kind of utopian ideal of a workplace that these women are working towards, which was kind of utopian in terms of obviously about female representation, but also about disability and also about race. I thought, well, that's kind of what we're still looking for now. I mean, that utopia hasn't changed. I mean, it was, and that's 1980, and this is kind of 2018. So I thought all of those things were highly relevant in it, and I've been working on a documentary recently for the BBC, and looking at icons. And one of those things about all those activist icons, whether it would be about race, whether it be about feminism, whether it be about disability, is kind of how big the strides they made then, and how little the strides have been since. They were all in the 20th century, and these huge strides like votes for women, things like that were happening. But in terms of the 21st century, it seems like pigeon steps.
And that's the interesting thing about 9 to 5 is all the things they are dealing with have really not changed. I mean, there's minor things that maybe don't quite ring true today, but the majority of it and what they're fighting against is, you could have that same plot today. You would have to change certain things about it, but the same story could apply to today. And that's the sad thing about it, I guess. That's the sad part of watching 9 to 5. As fun as it is you go, oh, this is 1980, but it's also still today.
So in 1980, you being part of the Goosebumps generation, did you think it was funny? I mean, it's been billed as a comedy.
I mean, I was not alive in 1980, so I can't attest to how funny it was in 1980, but I think it's still funny now. Absolutely. I think the thing with 9 to 5 is that it's one of those films that is very much a product of its time. And so some of the jokes you watch and you go, okay, well, that's a 1980s joke. And that would have been funny then, but maybe not so much now. But then I think there are still things about it which are eternal. And Dolly Parton will always be fabulous and funny, and the song is also timeless.
It's great. The other person that I would want to shout out to, actually, is Dabney Coleman, who plays the boss, because I thought he was really, really good, because he plays that character without seeking sympathy, which is sometimes a tricky thing to do in a comedy. And yet he's really funny. He's really got those kind of, the physical comedy stuff. He's got down, the looks, the turns. I thought he was really, really great. And it's something that I said to Jane Fonda as we were leaving. I kind of said, how good he was. And she said, listen, he was so good, I then cast him as my husband on Golden Pond. Different genre, etc. But yeah, I thought it was great. And also on a really personal level, when we finished the interview, because she is an icon, she said, thank you very much. You're really smart.
Oh.
Does that count for anything? I think it counts for something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you take away and you put it in your special diary.
Thank you very much. Still to come, we've got another hour of film conversation, of course, including these reviews, Clarice.
The Guilty, Bohemian Rhapsody, Possum, Bad Reputation, The Hate You Give, An Evening with Beverly Loughlin and Utoya, July 22nd.
We've got all of that, and you can still get in touch. Email mayo@bbc.co.uk or text 85058. If you missed my chat with Jane Fonda... That's all right. It'll be on the podcast, which will be available after the show. Now, before the news, I did ask what the 9 to 5 sequel should be, because Jane Fonda mentioned that they are in the midst of script development on it. And lo and behold, that's what I love about this show, great listeners, great parishioners. This is from Tina and Joe. Hello, Sanjeev and Clarice. We are listening live for the first time in ages. Normally download the podcast on the drive from Newport to Telford. Yep, got the picture. We are able to do so today as we recently left our 9 to 5 jobs to work on flexible hours with the civil service. Therefore, we think 9 to 5 sequel should be called Flexi Time. We've even come up with new lyrics for the song. Great show, both. Thanks, Tina and Joe. I thought you might send us the lyrics, but
where are the lyrics? Please.
You can work in flexi time.
What a way to variably make a living.
Tina and Joe, I hope yours is better than that. I'm sure.
I'm sorry.
I said no, don't apologise. At least you had a stab. You put your head above the parapet.
Right.
So on to another film, and the Queen biopic Bohemian Rhapsody is out this week. Lots of you have seen it, and we'll hear your thoughts shortly. But first, Clarice.
Yeah, so I feel like lots of people will disagree with this, but there are two versions of Queen in my head. There is the true rock god, revolutionary band version of Queen, the band that did the incredible Live Aid performance in 1985. that wrote Killer Queen, that were in the I Want to Break Free video, that were able to shift genres, you know, so fluidly just through that one rule of, you know, entertain the audience. And then there is the second Queen, which is the Queen that you yell down the microphone at karaoke, and it's quite fun, but it's a bit cheesy, it's a bit superficial, it's a little bit messy, and Bohemian Rhapsody is very much that second version of Queen. It is all spirit and then no soul, which I can see being enough for some people, but I think for me, if you're trying to tell the story of a real band, of the real Queen, then it is just far too hollow. And I know that, you know, there's been this very troubled production history with the film that's been very well publicized, from Sacha Baron Cohen dropping out of the film due to disagreements with the band, to the hiring of Bryan Singer, which was controversial due to the allegations against him. Also, his involvement was further complicated when he was fired off set due to unreliable behavior, and Dexter Fletcher had to step in, although due to DGA guidelines, Bryan Singer is still officially the sole director. But I have to say, this film doesn't scream to me troubled production. I think there aren't any weird editing errors or sort of weird gaps in time. I think my issues with it stem more from just the vision of the film and what it was trying to do. And it feels very much like, on the one hand, it is trying to be the greatest hits history of Queen, and anything that is the darkest lows is very clumsily and hastily dealt with. It doesn't want to engage with anything that is too emotionally difficult or too complicated. And also, it has this weird insistence on including the full catalogue of Queen. And so to the point that, and I should point out, everything is lip synced in this song, so there's no live performances. But so it gets to the point when you get to this Live Aid performance, and although it is brilliantly shot, and I think all the live performances are brilliantly shot, there's a great energy to them, but that Live Aid performance at the end has maybe 5 songs in it, and it felt almost like they got to the end and they went, right, what will be missed? Oh, Radio Gaga. We have to make sure we get Radio Gaga, otherwise people will be upset. And then when you get to the musical turning points in the band's history, like We Will Rock You or Bohemian Rhapsody, you get these very strange little backstories. And so we have the clip for one here. And just turn down the volume if you're listening to this loudly. I just want to warn you.
How was that?
Higher.
Can you go a bit higher?
If I go any higher, only dogs will hear me.
Try. Higher.
Jesus, how many more Galileos do you want?
One more.
One more.
Again.
Go on, roll the track. Who even is Galileo? Are we done?
That's it. He loves you.
So I'm imagining in a large room somewhere in London, there is a figure that is backed up against a wall surrounded by corgis. Just right now. Yapping away and looking menacing.
Yeah, so apologies for that, but it's a good representation of the film. And so you have these scenes where, you know, it will be the band. So you've got Freddie Mercury played by Rami Malek, Brian May played by Gwilym Lee, you've got Roger Taylor played by Ben Hardy, John Deacon played by Joseph Mazzello, and they'll all argue amongst each other for 5 minutes about, should we do this song? Oh, it's very different from what we've done before. And then someone says, oh, but we have to do it because that's Queen. And so then they do it and it becomes a huge success. And it's this very wink nudge attitude. There's this one scene with Mike Myers, who turns up as an EMI executive, and he's complaining about how no one will want to listen to a 6-minute Bohemian Rhapsody. And then he drops a Wayne's World reference, which to me, it's too much. You cannot do that. It's ridiculous. It crosses a line for me. And so the problem with this film, I think, at its very core, is that it wants to be this fun skip through Queen's discography, but it also wants to be the Freddie Mercury biopic. It wants to be the definitive one. It's very much from his perspective, as I guess it would be if you're making a film about Queen, but he is so terribly underserved here. And it's such a shame because Rami Malek is so good in this, and he nails, you know, the stage presence and the theatricality, but I think he also bring something a little quieter to the more pensive moments, which just really needed in this film. And it just, I feel sad because I feel like if he had been given better material, this had been a better film, we would be talking about Oscars here, because that's how good this performance is. And, you know, I think as well, the problem is he's just not given enough to do. And Freddie Mercury was such an incredible and fascinating and complex person. And, you know, nothing here is really explored to its fullest. And, you know, for example, I know everyone was very worried about how his sexuality would be depicted here, because I know he was a very private person, so it's not like we have any sort of definitive version of that story we can tell. Some people would describe him as gay, some people would describe him as bisexual. I think the film does leave it undefined, but it focuses a lot on his relationship with Mary Austin, played by Lucy Boynton, who he wrote Love of My Life about. But he did also have a relationship near the end of his life with Jim Hutton, who's played here by Aaron McCusker, which is left as this epilogue that we never really get to see. And so I think it's a shame for me to leave this whole chapter of his life just untold. And so that is the difficulty of the film for me, is that you can't be the fun, like, Queen movie, yeah, slap, clap, stomp, clap, not slap, clap. Stomp,
you can
clap.
do whatever you like.
That's my new Queen song, slap, clap. But, you know, it can't be that, and it also can't be the definitive Freddie story, and it's really not doing the latter any justice.
See, I mean, I saw it yesterday, actually, so it's still pretty fresh in my mind, and I think it is. See, I loved Queen, and I thought, you know, it was fantastic, great band, and I'm old enough, because I am old, to remember Live Aid and that performance at Live Aid, which was absolutely definitive for that day and for that time. And it also kind of rejuvenated their career, actually, in terms of becoming a stadium band after that. And they were fantastic. I remember it really well being at home. It was a hot day and they came on, and it was just the way he worked with the audience and stuff was amazing. And also Dexter Fletcher's a friend of mine, and I really like his work as well. But I think the film is a series of prologues and epilogues. And, you know, there are things that are touched upon at the very beginning of the film. Freddie Mercury is seen working as a baggage handler, and one of his co-workers calls him the P word. And his response is to say, "I'm not from Pakistan." And that is it. And you kind of go, that doesn't deal with what element of racism would have been around at that time. Freddie Mercury and his family moved into West London, in the area that I grew up in as well. So I know the area really well. I know what it was like, particularly in the 70s. None of that was touched upon. And, you know, you mentioned his sexuality. We don't really kind of get a sense of, you know, how that came to be. How did that, you know, make him, or how did he make it? That's sort of, you know, a prologue to something that's not explained. Even when he gets ill with AIDS, it happens very quickly. And again, that's not really explored either. And his flamboyance and excess is not really explored. And so in the end, I wasn't sure in the end whether they were trying to make a film about Freddie Mercury, a film about Queen, or a film about the song Bohemian Rhapsody. And in the end, it was kind of neither one of those. And it felt like a kind of, albeit entertaining, trailer for another film. It felt like a PG-13 trailer for a kind of, you know, a 15 certificate film that's going to come out later.
And it's frustrating because those things you mentioned, you see almost like the gems of what would be a good Freddie Mercury movie if you picked up on his sexuality, if you picked up on his upbringing, if you actually explored those things. Like, I could watch that movie and imagine a Freddie Mercury biopic with Rami Malek in the role. That would have been incredible if it actually, you know, sincerely attempted to explore who he was, because I don't know a huge amount about Freddie Mercury, and I was hoping to watch this film and learn who he was, and I walked away with no better picture, really.
No, well, I've kind of, you know, lots of interviews with his family, and, you know, one of the things that they said was that at home he was completely different. At home he was just, you know, normal Freddie, you know, at home, and all those personas things were part of the business. And that kind of disparity would have been interesting to kind of look at as would have been the relationship with his family. I mean, we see them a couple of times, but it's not really explored. This is from Owen from Dublin, Owen Davis, who says, being just 21, I unfortunately missed out on the sensation that was Queen and never got to experience what must have been the sheer excitement of a new Queen album being released. However, through a mixture of parents with good taste in music and sites like YouTube at my fingertips, I can now confidently say that if the only sounds I heard for the rest of my life were Queen songs, it would be a good life. Bohemian Rhapsody is a fantastic film which beautifully chronicles the life and career of one of the greatest performers in history. Perhaps the film's greatest achievement is the way in which it takes the most enigmatic superstar the world has seen and somehow manages to completely humanise him. As the film went on, I grew to dislike Mercury just as much as his bandmates and fell for his redemption story just as hard. I went on the journey filmmakers wanted me to, and loved every minute. Rami Malek gives the performance of a lifetime, and no movie about Queen could ever possibly have a bad soundtrack. But the best this film has to offer comes at its conclusion. This is from Dominic Varney, who says, after reading the initial reviews, on top of the knowledge of Sacha Baron Cohen's and Bryan Singer's departures due to creative differences and other reasons, I had an increasing number of anxieties about the film, which I tried to swipe away, which were sadly confirmed upon viewing. It's exactly the film that Baron Cohen didn't want to make. It's on the nose, it's bland, it's very PG-13 for a film about Freddie Mercury. It glosses over the major talking points of Queen's journey and Mercury's life. The film's direction is awkward, cringy and slightly boring. Most scenes feel creaky, awkward and needing some sort of cinematic lubrication. Nothing flows as smoothly as it should, and there's pockets of empty air in each moment. It's as if the actors are remembering their lines a fraction too late. And this is from Alison, who says, I can honestly say I don't know if I loved or hated it. There were many moments in the film when the songs didn't really seem to fit the years. Brian, Roger and John never seemed to go anywhere on their own, and Freddie's wig at the beginning was frightful. During the first half, Rami Malek just wasn't convincing as Freddie. He was an actor playing the role. However, he gradually grew into the role as Freddie became more and more vulnerable, and by the Live Aid set was amazing. Gwilym Lee was a Brian May clone, and Alan Leach was very credible as Paul Prenter. So the timings and story were sketchy and scrappy, but the music was great, and the cats abundant and beautiful. It did make me smile in places, and yes, a tear did roll down my cheek at times, but that was a music thing. Love of my life every time. Did I love it? I still can't make up my mind. Will I be going to see it again? Definitely. And that's Alison. I'd say the performances are actually uniformly good. I mean, Gwilym Lee, I've met Brian May a couple of times, and Gwilym is absolutely spot on. It's an uncanny kind of, capturing of what Brian May's like. But yeah, overall, I thought the performances were all pretty good. Rami Malek grew into his teeth, I think, as the film went on.
Yeah, I think it was just a case of getting used to them, because I'm so used to seeing Rami Malek not with those teeth that you have to readjust your image of him slightly. So I think it's just a case. Whenever any actor is wearing some quite extreme prosthetics, it just takes you about 15 minutes of the film to settle into it and go, okay, this is what he looks like.
We've got other Bohemian Rhapsody correspondence. Maybe we'll come to those in the podcast. So we'll have more of Bo Rap, as the cool kids are calling it. But another new release.
Yeah, shall I do The Guilty?
Okay.
So The Guilty works on very familiar terms. It's a real-time, single-location thriller. So think phone booth, buried, lock. We know this format. And because of that, I think it's a very hard format to crack. So this is the debut from Danish director Gustav Müller, and it's the Danish entry for the Best Foreign Language Film at next year's Oscars. But I think this film does actually bring something new to the table, which is refreshing. And so it trapped its protagonist, Asger Holm, played by Jacob Chedegren. I think that's the right pronunciation.
Cedergren, I think.
Cedergren.
Cedergren.
In the confines of an office, he's a police officer on emergency dispatch duty who is awaiting a court hearing for an unknown incident. And he gets a call from a woman named Iben, who's played by Jessica Denage, who's kidnapped, and she's in a car going to who knows where. And so the plot might sound similar to the 2013 film The Call with Halle Berry, but I can assure everyone it is very different, so don't worry. But I think what this film does that is very interesting is that it's a new development on the rear window concept, of the idea of having the protagonist in one location. There's a danger outside of the location that they feel impotent to intervene or to help in any way. And so there is this constant tension between the urgency of the events and then the mundanity of the call center around him, because most of the time they're dealing with very mild emergencies. It's a theft or an argument with a bouncer or someone falling off their bicycle. But, you know, in a single moment, everything could change. He's been handed this life or death situation, but the environment around him doesn't change. You know, it's still this harshly lit, drab office. The only aesthetic shortcut that's really taken is that he moves to a slightly smaller, slightly darker office, which is, you know, this visual metaphor of us tumbling down the rabbit hole with him. And, you know, I think the sound design as well, just the, you know, the stillness of the office versus the ominous happenings on the other end of the line, the rain pattering on the windshield and the windshield wipers squeaking back and forth. And so it's such an effective contrast there. And so also, I think you're asking so much of an actor here because the camera barely leaves his face. And I think to be able to pull off this kind of film, you have to have a huge amount of charisma. So you have to be like a Tom Hardy or a Colin Farrell. And I think what is so impressive about his performance is that not only can he pull off that sense of charisma, but he also keeps us at a distance. And so there's this mystery and there's this coldness to him, and we're trying to figure it out. And you know, there are also definite twists here, and I think the danger is that when you have a twist that is too obvious or a twist that's too outrageous, it might diminish the emotional impact. But here I think every twist serves the story, and that is to make us question ideas of responsibility and assumptions that we make about certain situations. And, you know, especially for a police officer who has to make these drastic decisions on minimal information. And so, you know, I think a real-time single-location thriller is a dangerous game to play. Some of them are great, some of them feel very gimmicky, but The Guilty is very much on the great side.
I agree with you. I thought it was really, really good. And for a debut film, I thought it was really impressive. But the other thing that, when I was reading up about it, was that so it reminded me, I mean, you mentioned Phone Booth and The Caller. You know, there are other films that have kind of, you know, in that single-person focused thing. But also films about hearing things where you don't get a picture. It's the one that you have to make up. So I was thinking of films like The Conversation or Lives of Others. You know, there's a picture that's being built up by the person who is listening. And to do it in real time was really bold. And as you say, the camera is on Jakob throughout. And one of the things they did do with this was that they had the actors who are phoning in, who are playing the other characters, in another room. So they were doing that as live, which a lot of the time, you know, when you see someone on the phone to somebody, it's usually a kind of, you know, an assistant director. It's an AD in the corner with the script. And so, you know, I might be saying, hi, police. Yeah, I'm in trouble. Okay, you're going to have to stop crying because I can't make out what you're saying. Yeah, I'm really emotional at the moment. And they just, you know, they fill it in later and they do all that kind of stuff. But this, I think, really helped the fact that those phone calls were coming to him live, and so he was responding live as well. I think you can tell that in that sort of, in the way that it kind of moves along. There's a kind of kinetic energy to it, even though they're quite static.
And the performance, actually, they bounce off each other, which is rare to see in phone dialogue scenes.
Yeah, because the thing is, with another actor at the phone, if they kind of pause for a second, you have a natural reaction to it. Whereas, you know, if it's an AD sitting with a biscuit in one hand and he stops, you just think, have you lost your place? Well, aren't you supposed to say something? So I thought that was great. So yeah, thumbs up for The Guilty. What else we got?
We have Possum, which is very much drawing from the palette of the British 1970s. So it's horror films, think Nicholas Roeg. It's public information films. It's shot on 35mm. The soundtrack is created by the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, who, you know, created stuff for Doctor Who and Quatermass and The Pit, and also just the colour brown, you know, that very brownish yellow, which is the official colour of the most grim, unglamorous parts of the 1970s. So it is a horror film. It's the debut of Matthew Holness, who he played Garth Marenghi in Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. That's probably where he's most familiar.
I loved that show.
Which, yeah, and that it really draws on the parodies of 80s British horror tropes. But this isn't quite a parody, and it's not even quite an homage. It's more that it uses the established language of these horror films to explore the idea of horror as a metaphor. And I think it does it very well. So you have Philip, played by Sean Harris, who comes home after an unnamed terrible incident, and he's forced to stay with his cruel, grotesque uncle, played by Morris, played by Alan Armstrong, who just gives him a constant stream of verbal abuse. And so through those conversations, you start to learn about their past, you start to learn about why he acts that way. And the possum of the title is a thing. I won't say what it is to ruin it, but it's a thing that he must physically carry in a leather holdall. So it's the physical thing, but it's also the emotional metaphor for his trauma. And so as the film progresses, you start to see how the physical thing changes his behavior and his psychology, but then you also see, that's the trauma changing his physical behavior and his psychology. And I think Sean Harris is so perfectly cast here because he has that immediate intensity to him, even when he has a completely neutral expression. And he's so good in this film at just tensing his entire body up. So it feels like he's carrying a burden, even when he's not physically carrying the possum, the unknown thing. And so I think all of that is so effective, but you have this slight issue where it's so studiously done, and it's so carefully done, and it's so thoughtfully done about this metaphor between the possum, the physical possum, and also the emotional trauma, that in a way it lessens the actual horror, the scariness of it. And so it's more a film that you watch and go, oh, well, that's a very interesting artistic exercise, but you're not hiding under your covers. And I think even some of the emotional impact is lessened. So
yeah, Sean Harris has got that ability to look both frightening and frightened at the same time, which is really a really interesting place to be. Yeah, the film's completely creepy, isn't it? I thought it was I thought it was great in that sense, and it's interesting that the Garth Marenghi kind of brigade have all kind of branched into films that have dealt with darkness in some way. Richard Ayoade and Alice Lowe, of course, as well. This is from Jane Klein, who says, "Dear esteemed substitute teachers," thanks for that. "I'm waiting nervously for your review of Possum today, as it was my favourite film of Fright Fest this year. Jaws is not a film about a shark. Possum is not a film about a scary puppet. Instead, it's a story about what happens when you survive trauma, but only just. The central performance by Sean Harris is absolutely barnstorming. For me, it's the best film I've seen in some time." And this is from Bill McPherson, who says, "I saw Possum at Fright Fest last month. Apart from Gaspar Noé's climax, it was the film I was looking most forward to. It certainly delivered in its photography, performance and even direction, but thematically it just wasn't there. I think Matthew Holness has made an interesting and really affecting film with Sean Harris, but it is perhaps despite the rather patched together plot, which may have made 3 excellent short films. Weirdly, the film it reminded me most of was David Cronenberg's Spider. Maybe Matt Holness conceived this idea after watching Spider, eating a huge cheese sandwich and falling asleep." That's from Bill McPherson. It was based on a short story, I think, that Matthew Holness had written. And again, it's a directorial debut. Again, I thought it was a really solid debut in terms of the images and the bleakness. I think all of that was captured really quite well. It's time for TV Movie of the Week, and some of you have been guessing what Clarice will pick and giving us your suggestions as well. This is from Marie Winter, who says, I'll go for Villain. It almost succeeds in being the film it wants to be, and I think it's very much an underrated classic. Watership Down is horrific. I dislike Vertigo. Yes, I know this is heresy. I don't know why, but it might be down to all the eye makeup they used to make Jimmy Stewart look evil. I suppose Flash Gordon is always worth a watch too. Mark Gillen says, "Some great choices. Just watched Princess Bride with my daughter. She loved it. I always felt that it does end rather suddenly. Also, I've been listening to the soundtrack of Flash Gordon in the car with the same daughter. She didn't know that Queen wrote the actual soundtrack. So guess what? We're off to see the Queen film this weekend as a result." John Watson says Dario Argento's incredibly underrated masterpiece Inferno is the one to watch this week, the second part of the Three Mothers trilogy. This is like the earlier Suspiria, a Maria Bava film turned up to 11, and like Suspiria is the perfect combination of horror and giallo cinema. Wynne Weldon says Gene Brody is my deathbed choice here, but I'd like to nominate a guilty pleasure in Deepwater Horizon, which is much better than I expected, most will think. The event is the star vehicle, not the star, first rate. Richard Sloman says Brian Blessed, Timothy Dalton, Max von Sydow, Queen, set design that looks like it was done by Blue Peter. Gotta be flush. Amazed this hasn't had a remake starring The Rock yet. And Jen Cresswell says, with a week with both Flash Gordon and The Princess Bride, this would be a no-brainer. But I say the prime of Miss Jean Brody, because it was because of this film that Maggie Smith was cast as Professor McGonagall. Clarice, what's your choice?
I think because I'm so excited about the Suspiria remake coming out, it has to be Inferno, which, you know, I feel like it's maybe not quite as consistently brilliant as the original Suspiria, which just in terms of keeping up that sense of atmosphere. But I think there are still so many standout moments in that film, in Inferno. I love the scene in the lecture hall where our hero is being stared at by a woman who just has a cat for some reason in the lecture hall, and she's looking at him and he's looking at her and the cat's looking at him, and it's just this completely magnetic three-way stare off, and it's just an incredible sequence.
There you go. When is that on? And when?
Oh, so that is on at 1:10 on Sunday on Film 4.
That's your TV of the week. Is that AM or PM?
AM, I believe.
Is it?
Yes.
You sure?
Yes, so stay up late.
And TV movie so bad it's bad. So we have Gerard Sweeney, who says if there's a Transformers film on the list, it's pretty much a winner. Or loser, as the case may be. Scorpion King gets a mention for featuring some WWE guy, as if a wrestler could ever have a successful film career. Ian Johnston says Transformers Dark of the Moon. Third time lucky? No. More like Strike 3 for Michael Bay & Co. And still they keep coming. Horrible stuff. Kat Day says Transformers, DOTM, as no one is calling it, inexplicably has 4 stars in this week's Radio Times. Oh, Andrew Collins, why? Simon Belcher says, who saw the Rex Harrison musical and thought, I would like this more without the songs and with Eddie Murphy as the star. Dr. Dolittle is clearly the worst film. And Danny Thorne says, at the risk of being excommunicated from the church, I quite like the Mortal Instruments. Clarice, so bad it's bad.
Why is the Scorpion King on that list? Well, okay, I've only seen it once and I saw it when I was 12. But at the time I thought it was a masterpiece. I was obsessed with The Rock in that movie. I thought the Scorpion King in 2002 was the coolest person alive. So I will never put the Scorpion King down as a TV movie so bad it's bad.
Can I just say, it was described by the New York Times as like having several garbage cans clogged with stale pizza, lukewarm cola, soggy French fries and greasy ketchup-stained napkins emptied over your head.
Sure, I mean, that's one way to put it. Or you're just watching The Rock be extremely cool for a running time of 2 hours or however long it is. So I think I'll go with Dr. Dolittle for the great crime of removing songs.
The great crime of removing songs it is. And on to another new release.
Yes, so The Hate U Give. And I'm very happy to be on the show when this film is coming out because I love to talk about teen movies. I think we always underestimate their importance because they come out, you know, at a time in your life when a little bit of guidance can make a world of difference. And to see a film like this that engages in real experiences, you know, it just makes me want to scream from the rooftops about how great it is. And I do kind of want to scream from the rooftops about The Hate U Give because it's a film that is just so honest about the stuff that we know that Black teenagers, specifically in the USA, they have to deal with these things, they have to worry about these things, but the mainstream media so rarely acknowledges that. And so, for example, you have the opening scene where our hero star, played by Amandla Stenberg, has the talk, which for white teens, that has one meaning, that is the birds and the bees. But the talk, you know, for parents of Black children is also the talk where you have to sit them down and tell them what to do and how to act if you're stopped by the police. And so the catalyst in this film is that Star's childhood friend Khalil, played by Algie Smith, is shot by a policeman when his car has been pulled over. And that it's an image that is familiar and heartbreaking and enraging for the audience to see. And so what is so effective about this film is that it explores that wider conversation, but it also hones in on the personal experience. And so on one hand, you hear from an activist played by Issa Rae, and also from the point of view of a cop played by Common, he is Star's uncle, and so you're seeing these different perspectives. And there's one scene where she sits down with her father and they deconstruct the title of the film, which stands for Thug Life, which was the group that Tupac Shakur founded. And they sit down and they deconstruct what that title means, and we have a clip of that scene.
Trying to make some sense out of it.
It's thug life. The hate you give little infants.
F's everybody. I know what it stands for. What do you think it means?
I think it's about us.
Us who?
Black people. Poor people, everybody at the bottom.
Right, you want it? Pac was trying to school us on how the system's designed against us. Why else you think so many people in our neighborhood deal?
They need the money.
Yeah. And ain't no real jobs around here. So they fall into the trap.
Can I just tell you that thug, Indian word, comes from India.
Oh, well, they don't discuss that.
No.
Oh.
No, there's no point where they say, thug, Indian.
Yeah.
They don't say it.
No, well, that can be one point against it. But, you know, they are having these direct conversations about discrimination and police brutality. But I think the mistake with this film would be to assume that it has all the answers. Instead, it's reflecting the conversations that teenagers are either having or the conversations that they want to have and are maybe not having the opportunity to have those conversations. And, you know, it's about acknowledging a reality, and in this case, it's Star's reality. You know, someone who's having to process a traumatic event as a teenager while also learning about the power of her own voice, because there are certain people who don't want her to speak out about it at all. There are people who want her to speak out in certain ways. And the film makes a very big point of her learning that, you know, your voice is your own and you have to speak in the way that feels truthful to you. And I think that is an incredibly powerful message to give to teens. And the brilliance as well of the film is that it's not a one-issue film. It's reflecting so many different things that Black teenagers are having to deal with. It's talking about code switching, you know, where you have to change the way that you talk or the way that you express yourself to fit into certain environments. And for Star, she basically has to cleave her identity in two because she's splitting her life up between her home in Garden Heights, which is a working class majority Black neighborhood, and her school, which is a wealthy majority white school. And she's ends up feeling like she doesn't belong in either world. And so it's dealing with that. It's also dealing with attitudes to mixed race relationships. You know, she has a white boyfriend played by KJ Apa. She's dealing with white friends who act Black but won't actually stand by her when she needs them. And she's also worrying about prom, what she's going to wear to prom and what she's going to put on her Tumblr page. And so it's all about putting that together, all of that together in one experience, and to put that into the teenage experience, which is so rare for a mainstream film. And also the performances are fantastic, from Russell Hornsby as the dad, Regina Hall as the mother, and then Amandla Stenberg, who is such a leader for her community, like outside of this film, and for her generation, such a voice for her generation. And I think that really bleeds into the character. And so I think this is a film that just speaks so directly and so intelligently to teens, and I think that is a thing to treasure.
This is from Amelia from Glasgow, who says, "The Hate You Give is a really important film, and I would urge everyone to go and see it. My partner and I both felt that it gave a much more rounded view of racism in America than The Black Klansman did. We both loved the Spike Lee film, but I felt it gave a one-sided portrayal of the issues of race in the States. The experiences of racism shown through the innocent eyes of a teenager who's trying to fit in and find her identity at home and at school makes for a really raw and emotional portrayal of the issues that black people and people of other races still face every day. The portrayal of a father having the talk, as you just mentioned as well, with his children, no talk I've ever had to have with my parents about what to do to stay safe from the people that are meant to protect us and how to appear absolutely not threatening, because as they say in the film, how can we be unarmed if they see our blackness as the weapon, is just heartbreaking. The movie and Amanda Stenberg's fantastic performance demonstrated a complex, emotional, raw, but also realistic story of racism today. This is the second mainstream media film I've seen this year which shines a light on issues we are still facing as a society through the eyes of young people who are trying to make sense of it all. And just like Love, Simon had a massive impact in and outside of the LGBT community, I hope that Thug does too. Thank you for that, Amelia. And this is from Nick Atkinson, who says, "The World of Cine occasionally give a secret preview screening where you have no idea what you're seeing until the tile appears. The latest of these was The Hate You Give, which prompted many walkouts. However, in my view, those that did leave missed out. I had never heard of the book or was aware a film was on its way, and was slightly concerned which way the film was going after the first 10 minutes, when it appeared to be another standard teen girl love angst offering. However, after this initial section, it moved into a story which I was not expecting, and what a well-executed story it was. You could easily bracket it as a roller coaster of a film with laughs, tragedy, tension, all thrown in, but it was the relevance to the current issues, relevance to the current increase in racial tension that really got to me. It is also the first film I've been to for a long time in which one scene towards the end of the film resulted in a very audible intake of breath from many of the filmgoers in the screening, which can only be down to how engrossed we all were. The main characters were well played out, and Amanda Stenberg was a revelation in the lead role, switching between the character traits with ease. I believe she will go on to great things in the future. I don't think this film will get the attention it deserves, but I would encourage everyone to make the effort to see it. Thank you for that, Nick. It kind of echoes what you were saying, I guess.
That's good.
That's good. Well done.
I'm not on my own here.
Well done, you. Yeah, no, you're never on your own. You're never on your own.
Good. No, but I think it's an important film, and I think even if it's not something you would, choose to go see a teen movie, I think take a chance on it.
I think, outside of the race issue, those are issues which all teenagers have. Trying to fit in, having duality, having to, a different kind of code in terms of language or in terms of behaviour outside the home and inside the home. I think those are all roots in, I would have thought, to understanding the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
On to Bad Reputation.
Yes, so this is about one of my personal favourite rockers, Joan Jett, who's best known for songs Bad Reputation, Crimson and Clover, I Love Rock and Roll, and for her first band, The Runaways. And the reason I love her is that she is so tough and so fearless, but she seems genuine as well. There's no posturing to her attitude, which I just really appreciate that. And so, she always seems like she can have fun. And I think this documentary by Kevin Koslake really reflects well that side of her. The editing is fast, it's scrappy. There are all these little clips and photographs from her life, and it really feels like she's speaking in her voice. But I think, the dominant image of her is of this revolutionary. She's revolutionary just by being herself and continuing to be herself, even when her career just faced roadblock after roadblock. She was 13 when she first wanted to play the guitar. She got her first guitar lesson. The teacher said, "Girls don't play rock and roll." And then she went to LA and formed the Runaways, and during her gigs, she had car batteries and beer cans thrown at her head. And so this is her talking about kind of processing that side of it.
Get spit on. I mean, I just felt like I couldn't leave the stage. I'd go off afterwards and cry just because I didn't get it. And then I'd feel better after I'd, cried a little bit, going, why?